In this video, I want to talk about the Lord Mistborn, basically a mythological character by the end of the Mistborn series. And the reason I find him so cool is that I think we see the full arc of this character from basically like a young boy to a legendary ruler to what I'm going to argue is an immortal figure that will reshape the nature of souls and self in the Cosmere. But this video will include spoilers for primarily all of the Mistborn series, both Eras 1 and Era 2, up until the end of the Lost Metal. And I'll also draw from the Mistborn secret history. And then a little bit of the Stormlight archive, probably up until the end of Rhythm of War, but not necessarily spoiling anything that happens in Wind and Truth. So with that, let's get into it. Okay, who is the Lord Mistborn? By the time of Mistborn Era 2, Wax and Wayne and Marasi and a number of other figures on Scadrial refer to Lord Mistborn as this almost like mythological character that lives hundreds of years ago. And who is it? Let's just get it out of the way. It's Spook, aka Lestiborns. And for the readers of the first trilogy of Mistborn Era 1, Spook was basically a member of Kelsier's crew. It's kind of like a young'un. He was roughly like 15 years old or so when he joined Kelsier's crew, and he was a Tin-Eye. His grandfather had noble blood, and as a result, he was an Allomancer, a Tin-Eye specifically, meaning he could burn tin, which essentially enhanced all of his senses. And Spook, I think, in Mistborn Era 1 has a really quite lovely character arc where he transforms from this like gangly character into somebody that basically is like a hero and save the city. But I don't want to focus on that arc for this video. In fact, I want to focus on what happens to Spook after the final ascension and as he is passed into myth, what that actually means in practice, and what I think may be something that is happening to him, which is that he is alive and flitting around somewhere in the Cosmere off Scadrial. Okay, so what turned Spook into the Lord Mistborn, this mythological hero 300 years later? And there's two things I want to talk about here in particular. One is he becomes Mistborn. After the end of Mistborn Era 1, the world has basically changed. Harmony has remade Scadrial, he's healed Spook, and he's converted him into being Mistborn. Which means he's like kind of like the ultimate Allomancer, and he can draw power and burn all 16 allomantic metals at once. And so by the time that Mistborn Era 2 and the time of kind of like Wax and Wayne rolls around 300 years later, he is known as the most powerful Allomancer that ever lived because of this ability to be Mistborn. He also turns out to be like a little bit of a stud in that he has like multiple kids. And we know that because in the time of Mistborn Era 2, he has a number of different descendants that form like kind of the basis of Elendil's noble or high society. The second element here that turns him into this like legendary figure in Mistborn Era 2 is that he becomes the first emperor of Elendil in the new world that Harmony has remade. Trained by Breeze, it appears to me at least that he was like kind of a pretty good ruler. He was the first emperor of the new world. He was also the last, because he kind of remade the political system to be less about like nobility and high society and more about trying to place power in the hands of the common people. So Elendil, by the time of Wax and Wayne and Mistborn Era 2, kind of has like a parliamentary system with two houses, one elected and one kind of like the House of Lords in the UK. And because of what Spook or Lord Mistborn set up. And he also didn't just do that. He also, like, from the hints that we get, he clearly tried to support the poor of Elendil. There's a note in there where he tried to make sure that slums didn't form in Elendil by building affordable housing for the communities. and he puts forward this ideal of the new world that is more equitable than the one that preceded it. And it's not clear to me exactly how long he ruled for, probably like roughly like some decades at least. But these criteria, him being Mistborn and him being the first and the last emperor of Elendil, is enough to make Spook take on this like legendary status as the Lord Mistborn that has persisted for hundreds of years after he stepped down as emperor. But I actually think that maybe the tip of the iceberg for Spook or Lord Mistborn, and there's more to come from him. For one, I think he may have made himself immortal. In the epilogue in Mistborn's Secret History, Kelsier dangles the prospect of immortality in front of Spook, saying that because Harmony had remade him into being Mistborn, he's kind of like halfway there into being immortal already. And Kelsier actually compares Spook to the Lord Ruler, the old emperor in Scadrial, and says that like for the Lord Ruler, by combining his ferrochemical and his allomantic powers, had created this compounding effect that enabled him to be immortal. And so what Kelsier seems to suggest, and what I think Spook did end up doing, is that combining the allomancy that he has or is able to tap into by virtue of being Mistborn with Hemalurgy, he is able to become essentially like functionally immortal, or at least I think potentially alive by the time that Mistborn Era 2 and frankly like the events in the Stormlight Archive roll around. And so for Hemalurgy specifically, Kelsier kind of points to this like pile of Inquisitor spikes that are left behind and tempts Spooks to use them, which I think he does. And so if he does, and the reason I think he does is because what we learn by the time of Mistborn Era 2 is that Spook, or the Lord Mistborn, has written basically the remaining definitive book on Hemalurgy. And so if he does become immortal, or potentially like at least like increase the longevity of his life beyond like what is a normal lifespan, where is he now? And so to answer that, let's turn to the book that I mentioned, the definitive book on Hemalurgy written by Spook, or the Lord Mistborn himself. And in it, he talks about Hemalurgy, and what he says is, Hemalurgy can create practically anything by rewriting its spiritual aspect. And just as an aside, Hemalurgy is kind of like explained a little bit similarly in the Ars Arcanum in Mistborn, where it's described as, at its core, a magic system that deals with removing abilities or attributes from one person and bestowing them on another. So the question to me is, could Spook have basically used Hemalurgy and his allomantic powers, but Hemalurgy, to rewrite his spiritual aspect, to rewrite his soul, and become someone else entirely? And if so, who would that be? Who would Spook have wanted to be? And could it be, hear me out, this is total speculation, Kelsier? Spooks has always admired Kelsier. He has basically, I think, like wanted to be him. And when Kelsier asks him for assistance, part of what Kelsier learns is that they have this particularly strong spiritual connection that Kelsier notices is stronger than Kelsier's connection with, say, Vin, or even Kelsier's brother Marsh. And so could Kelsier, in his quest to kind of like nail himself into the physical world, combined with Spooks' willingness to try to be immortal, or at least increase the longevity of his life, could they have, at least for some period of time, combined forces? And could Spook, as he comes to the end of his rule of Elendil, use the form of Hemalurgy to connect his body to Kelsier's soul, and then take it on, becoming Kelsier, maybe as like kind of an avatar of Kelsier? I know this is like kind of a crazy theory, and there's a lot I think here that we need to tease out, but what I want to think about a little bit is, regardless of whether Spook became like an avatar of Kelsier, like I'm speculating, or something else. I do think there's a way that he figured out how to increase the longevity of his life, and I don't think he's on Scadrial anymore. In fact, this is like not my theory. This is actually one that I saw on Reddit, and I'll link the link in the description below. But I think it's possible that he may have gone world hop to another planet, and specifically that he may have gone to Roshar and Roshar's cognitive realm. This theory kind of suggests that Spook is the character that is known as 16 in the Honor-Spren Kingdom of Lasting Integrity on Roshar. That Shallan like kind of briefly interacts with him as she's searching for Kellic the Herald. 16 specifically is a character that we know basically like nothing about. All we know is that he lives in lasting integrity and he comes out of his house every 16 days. It's unclear for what. And we also know that he seems to speak a different language than a Rosharan language, which could be the language that he speaks on Scadrial. And I think the reason that I think this could be Spook, and I agree with kind of this theory that it's at least something to consider, is that certainly like Spook, obviously, by virtue of being Mistborn, you can use all 16 elementic metals. He clearly has explored Hemalurgy, maybe to the point of using all 16 Hemalurgic abilities, and heck, maybe even like all 16 ferrochemical abilities. And it makes sense to me that he would try to leave Scadrial after he's kind of like completed his legacy of taking over Elendil and then leaving it in kind of a better place. But the reason that I wanted to make this video is actually not about Spook. It's about a little bit about this larger question, which is the combination of different powers in Scadrial, whether it's allomancy with ferrochemy or whether it's allomancy with hemalurgy, or whether it's all three combined, has huge, wide-ranging consequences for the Cosmere. And in fact, in the Ars Arcanum, Chris, obviously, who's the author of that, writes that of the three magic systems on Scadrial, Hemalurgy is the one that is of most importance in the Cosmere. And in fact, she says that because of the implications, I think, that you can essentially like rewrite your own soul and become someone else, which, as I've said, I think Spook may have done. And I think that fundamentally transforms, if you can transform the spiritual aspect of who you are, it transforms the way that we think about souls and of self in the Cosmere. So what do you think? I think like Spook and Lord Mistborn is so cool. I think there's more to come with the Lord Mistborn as we kind of look to the space age of Scadrial and the space age of, frankly, the Cosmere. And I'd love to know what you think, if there's anything that I feel like that I've missed when we've been thinking about Spook and his relationship with Kelsier. And if you like this kind of content, please subscribe to my channel. I continue to post as regularly as I can on all things Cosmere. So thank you, everyone.